Hello and welcome to Get Yourself Optimized. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, and today we have Dr. Joseph Mercola with us. Dr. Mercola is the founder of Mercola.com. He's been a family doctor for decades, or he started as a family doctor many decades ago, author of about a dozen books, keynoted at many conferences, including I saw him keynote at the Bulletproof Biohacking Conference several years ago. So it's so great to have you on the show, Dr. Mercola.
Well, thank you for having me.
So let's first of all address the elephant in the room, which is the pandemic and coronavirus. I know you've been very much a proponent for vitamin D as something that can help boost immune systems, in particular against COVID-19. So could you elaborate a bit more about your recommendations for boosting your immune system since we're heading into another wave, apparently, of the virus?
Yeah, it certainly seems to be the case. As we're recording this, they're locking down many countries in Europe. We haven't locked down much of the United States at this point, but that seems to be inevitable. A recurrence of what they did earlier this year. So that obviously has captured most of our attention now. It really is embraced, a lot of what we're doing and really changed the culture in a quite dramatic way that we never, ever thought or anticipated. So to not have some focus on this is a challenge. I mean, it's not my desire to do that. My major passion is optimizing health span.
Yeah.
Which is why you saw me at the Biohacking conference, because I really dived deep on that. That's what I progressed to, and unfortunately had to divert to this issue because it was so crucial to getting the culture back on board. But essentially, I've been a champion for vitamin D for over 2 decades and have been promoting it. Was one of the first physician journalists in the country to promote it in last century, when at the time it was just thought to be useful for treating rickets and osteomalacia. We know now that it does far more things. It's an unbelievable hormone. It has epigenetic influences on over 2,300 genes in your body. And a large number of those genes are related to immune optimization and functioning. So there have been loads of epidemiological correlations with respect to vitamin D levels and the likelihood of you dying from vitamin D deficiency or suffering really severe consequences. Unfortunately, a correlation study is not causation, but those randomized placebo-controlled trials are actually in process. And I carefully reviewed the literature earlier this year. We compiled a paper. It was about 30 pages with 300 or 400 references. And I actually just had it published. It's published in Nutrients and will be I think later this month. I mean, it's probably available online for free. The reason we want Nutrients is the authors can pay a little bit more, and then it's available for free for everyone to look online. So, I co-authored it with 2 vitamin D experts and researchers in the field who are really quite well published. It took us a while to get it in there. The editors were a bit reluctant to do it, but they finally capitulated and published it. And we put together, actually with your help, a website called Stop COVID Cold. Stop COVID Cold. A catchy name, isn't it? Well, Stephan had something to do with that. It took us many hours to figure out what to use, but it's a free website. No email capture or anything. You just go in there and just information. It was my effort to really help support the community at large, to give them a useful tool that can radically decrease the risk. So what does it do? It, as I said earlier, it dramatically enhances your immune system in a wide variety number of ways. And we go into detail if you go to that site, because the site allows you to do 2 things. One is to take a quick 2-minute test. The test will give you a nearly instantaneous assessment of what your risk factor is for coming down with this disease. And based on the way you answer the questions, it will give you some specific recommendations that will radically reduce your risk for developing it. Because we know now that, depending on your age and your activities, I mean, you can literally, even the conservative CDC that says that certain groups are only have 99.99% chance of surviving. So, and you can that decreases as you get into an older age group, maybe up to 95%. But it's clearly the vast majority of people come down with this illness do not die from it. But there's still, if 95% or 5% of those who come down with it die, that's a pretty significant number. So there are many things that you can do, such as optimizing your vitamin D level, and then also your metabolic flexibility, or your body's ability to seamlessly transition between burning fat and sugar for fuel. And if that's optimized, you can change that number by 100-fold. So instead of having a 0.01% chance of dying, it would be 0.0001% chance of dying. So, I mean, wouldn't you want to improve your odds by 100-fold? I mean, that's just crazy not to. And most of these things are free. Now with vitamin D, as we're recording this, it's, we're entering the winter season. So unless you're in a subtropical area, like I border on a subtropical area in Florida, but even in Florida, a month or 2 months out of the year, you're not going to be able to get significant amounts of vitamin D. But in almost every area of the country, that's for sure you're not going to. So you're going to have to use a supplement. But if it was the summer, you wouldn't even need to take a supplement. I mean, and that is the ideal way to optimize your vitamin D. It's the way we're designed to. You have a significant amount of our skin exposed to the sun, because there's other benefits other than vitamin D production when you do that, and that optimize health. But even so, if you take a supplement, vitamin D is one of the least expensive supplements, and it doesn't require any fancy processing, and literally it's so inexpensive. I mean, we recommend people get a test because there's, like your blood pressure, there's no way to know what your level is. But if you just decide, finances are difficult and you don't want to do it, well, typically a year's worth of vitamin D supplement costs less than a test. So it's in many ways it's almost free. I mean, it's not free obviously, but it's really, it's one of the least expensive supplements you can get. And then metabolic flexibility doesn't involve anything. So, my focus as a natural medicine physician for the last 30 years or so has been to provide people with simple and inexpensive, low-cost resources as an alternative to drugs and surgery to prevent disease and needless pain and suffering and dying prematurely. And vitamin D optimization is probably one of the single most important strategies you can do to not only beat COVID, but to radically improve your health overall, such as decreasing your risk for the most common causes of death, which would be heart disease, cancer. And then you've got all the other goodies like dementia, Alzheimer's, diabetes, obesity, macular degeneration. So it improves all of those things if you're have enough vitamin D, and then you're metabolically optimized and you're not insulin resistant.
Right. And how do you find out if you're insulin resistant?
Well, probably, I mean, I threw out that term without defining it, so many people have probably heard of the term, but they don't know what it means. Insulin is a hormone that your body produces that obviously causes your body to utilize sugar. And most of us are having too many carbohydrates in processed foods, and as a result, it's actually really the processed foods rather than the carbohydrates, but the combination certainly doesn't help. But there's a very dangerous, poisonous fat that's called linoleic acid. It's an omega-6 fat, and it's just pervasive in our food supply for over a century. It's one of the most important reasons why we've had such a dramatic increase, a true pandemic of disease. No question. It's not infection. It's an adoption of eating foods that has just literally decimated our health. You say, well, how can that be? At the beginning of the 20th century, our lifespan, our life expectancy rather, was significantly lower than it is now. Well, that's because we've had advancements in science that allows us to treat diseases like infections very effectively with antibiotics, and hygiene, and a variety of other advances that really doesn't address the underlying damage that's being done by this shift in the choice of the foods that we're eating. So there's foods that are high in these omega-6 vegetable oils that, they're called vegetable oils generically, And that's a misnomer because it's almost a marketing strategy, and you're pretty familiar with that because vegetables, of course, are healthy. Well, so the vegetable oils have to be healthy. Well, no, nothing could be further from the truth. These are the most dangerous poisons that you could possibly be, other aside from something like cyanide, that would kill you instantly. These kill you slowly over time, and these cetos are pervasive. Many people watching this probably understand that, but for those who don't, I'm talking about things like canola oil, soybean oil, which use has increased like 10,000 fold in the last 100 years, corn oil. All of those are not only industrially processed seed oils, but they're also genetically modified, so they're contaminated with glyphosate. So, but what's far more dangerous than the glyphosate and the fact that they're concentrated, devoid of other micronutrients, is the fact that they have these high concentrations of linoleic acid, which just literally decimates your health at a molecular biological level, at the level of the mitochondria. It really radically destroys mitochondrial function, or causes mitochondrial dysfunction, by integrating into a real important part of the inner mitochondrial membrane that gets damaged and oxidized because of this fat that's not supposed to be there. Because you do need some of this fat, but it really needs to be less than 2% of your diet. And most of us are getting like 10 times that amount, which is just a prescription for disaster, metabolic disaster. So if you can identify these things and understand them and limit this poison from your foods that you're eating, which doesn't cost you anything. Well, it does a little bit, because ideally, if you want to focus on eating healthier foods, those healthier foods may cost a little more, but essentially it's food you're going to eat. We're not suggesting any supplements or magic potions to detoxify or insulate or protect you from these things. The simple strategy is to eliminate them from your food source. So simple, basic, virtually free interventions that can radically improve your ability to enjoy life and health and not have to suffer needlessly by eating these types of dangerous, poisonous foods. That's the reason I went into medicine. And most people, when they go into med school, they're committed to getting people healthy and really get great joy out of doing that. That's one of their big rewards. I mean, some of them people go into the further finances, but I think the bulk of them don't. Unfortunately, the system, having gone through it, will brainwash virtually all the students and propagandize them with essentially marketing material from drug companies. So they understand basic anatomy, human physiology, and biochemistry, molecular biology, but they don't understand that the treatment for almost every disease they're going to see in their professional career isn't in a prescription bottle. It is not in a prescription bottle, but that's what's taught. It's been taught that way for over a century, really since 1910, 110 years, when Rockefeller and Carnegie foundations went in and subsidized the medical school curriculum. And they had a dramatic shift about 110 years ago, and that literally just changed. I mean, almost all the nutritional information was removed from the curriculum, and homeopathy was destroyed, and it's just this massive shift. And of course, Rockefeller, who I live right down the street from where he passed away. In our little town where he's kind of like a local celebrity, but he was obviously at the time he was living was the wealthiest guy in the world. But many people understand that he was associated with the oil industry, Standard Oil, and an outproduct of the oil industry many people don't realize is the pharmaceutical industry. Contemporary pharmaceuticals are really derived from oil. So he had this massive conflict of interest, and was really pretty strategic and wise and sharp to understand that if you can go in there and brainwash the medical, or the medical schools, but the medical profession, and convince them and sort of bribe the teachers that this was the way to go. It's a pretty clever strategy to increase your market share for your product. and continue that. So that's what's been going on for over a century. I mean, the longer these types of charades persist, the harder they are to get over. And I give you a few other examples of that would be the use of mercury in dentistry. So I'm a physician. I started a website before Google started theirs, literally in 1997. And so I love technology, and I transitioned away from seeing patients over a decade ago. And as a source of revenue, we sell resources and tools to help people take control of their health. And that provides a healthy source of revenue for me, more than enough that I need so I can donate some of it. And we do donate millions of dollars every year to charities. And one of the charities is the Consumers for Dental Health and Dental Choice, I'm sorry. And they have been instrumental at essentially initiating legislative changes to eliminate mercury from dentistry in the entire world. And it's in process now. I feel very grateful to have been able to facilitate that, because, no one's going to disagree that the most effective way to treat a disease is to prevent it in the first place. And so, yeah, you can have all these sophisticated and expensive, typically, strategies and protocols for detoxifying mercury, but the best way is not to put it in there in the first place.
Yeah.
And, and many people may not realize that a silver filling is not the majority silver. The majority of it is mercury, which is definitely a poison. Actually, probably more poisonous than the linoleic acid acutely. But with respect to the damage it causes, I would say linoleic acid far exceeds it because it's so more pervasive. Not everyone has silver fillings. And interestingly, why would you need silver fillings? It's kind of goes full course. You need silver fillings because you have dental decay, right? There are cultures in the world, I'm sure if anyone realizes this, that have virtually no dental decay. And it's not because they're genetically gifted. No, it's because they're choosing to eat foods that don't catalyze damage in your mouth. So then if you don't have dental decay, you don't need any type of filling, whether it's an amalgam mercury filling or another safer version. So, but anyway, so one of our targets of our philanthropic efforts is the ability to get mercury out, and we also, so mercury is one, and then fluoride kind of goes along with that, and which we've worked with the Fluoride Action Alert Group, Dr. Paul Connett, who's been pretty useful. Actually, he's facilitated a lawsuit against the EPA earlier this year to classify fluoride as a poison. I mean, we've shown, but the science has shown that it really is negative, or not negative, but it causes damage in the brain and lowers your IQ, just like lead did. And so this went to trial in a I don't know if it was an appellate court or some high court viewed it, and they're going to, if the EPA doesn't do something, because this is the first time the EPA has been sued in this area, and the judge is going to force some action. So we're kind of excited about that too. So, So the key is just to prevent these things, take action before you need it. And that is usually the wisest, the least expensive, and the most effective strategy to really take an intervention to help your health.
Yeah, and wasn't it Hippocrates who said, "Let food be thy medicine"?
I believe so. Yeah.
And,
so
the whole medical establishment made it almost woo-woo to think about changing your diet as a way to fight or prevent cancer and heart disease and so forth.
Well, the challenge in optimally integrating that wise proverb is to understand what food really is. Because essentially anything in the grocery store is, technically and legally food, but, probably less than 5% of it would truly qualify for it. Even food that we think is healthy, like vegetables, there are many, many people who are following plant-based diets and don't eat any animal products. And they exhibit, many of them exhibit a pretty high level of health relative to the population, but the regular population is eating the worst food that we've ever done historically. So it's not hard to do better than that. You eliminate those types of food from your diet and you're eating vegetables. So there's a large level of emerging data in the science that strongly suggests that some of these vegetables can be highly problematic. And integrating more animal-based foods into your diet, healthy animal foods, it can be useful. And as an interesting tangent to that, not all animal foods are healthful either, because there are certain animal foods that are loaded with linoleic acid because of the way that they're fed. And this would be things like chickens and pigs. One of the reasons why those are good foods to avoid, not necessarily chicken eggs, but certainly chickens themselves, is that they're high in linoleic acid. And most all the chickens, if you go back 100 years, you dial it back, virtually no one ate chicken. It's a modern day food, and it's used quite frequently because it's an artifact of the low fat myth that destroyed so many people's health. Chicken became very popular because it's a low fat meat, but the fat that is in the chicken is largely, not largely, but a large percentage of it is linoleic acid, which can really damage your health at a molecular level. It just it makes it almost, for many people, almost impossible to lose weight. And obviously we have 2/3, more than, in some states, 70-80% of the population who are overweight and 40-50% who are obese. That's insane. You go back 100 years, dial it back. Do you think you saw those number of people being obese? No. And in large part, not because, it's not the high fat carbs, it was the type of fat that they were eating. So, I'm not a proponent of the low fat diet, although the low fat diet could work. I don't think it's as healthy as a high fat, high healthy fat diet. But when you have a low fat diet that was recommended in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, they vilified saturated fat, which is probably one of the healthiest fats you can eat, and they replaced it with these vegetable oils. So not only was it low fat, but the fat that they were encouraging people to use was the poisonous fat. So that's one of the primary reasons why people never got better, and we had this explosion of disease. It's not commonly known that many of the most common forms of death in this country, like cancer and heart disease, were very, very rare. People did not have them a century ago. And, common morbidities such as blindness as a result of aging didn't exist more than 100 years ago. It wasn't even known. It wasn't even written in the textbooks until like 1920. They hadn't even identified. It was a rare aberration, never seen. But now it's affecting tens, hundreds of millions of people around the world. So all as a result of simply not understanding and applying basic foundational principles of biology.
Yeah. But I think a lot of people have an addiction to these things like French fries and falafels and hamburgers and all the and fried chicken and all that sort of stuff that's very toxic. And
well, I wouldn't include hamburgers as being toxic. Even if it was some CAFO, probably better than a lot of other options. I'm no fan of CAFO meat, and CAFO is an acronym for Confined Animal Feeding Operations, which is the way most of the meat is produced in this country under awful, inhumane conditions to the animals, and just exponential animal cruelty being implemented there. So I am not an advocate of that. I'm more in favor of grass-fed, humanely raised animals that are humanely slaughtered and sacrificed. So, but even if you had a CAFO hamburger, it's still probably healthier. Typically, because they're not fried. But the other things like falafel or any French fries, of course, they're going to be fried, and frying makes it even worse.
Right.
It didn't used to be as bad. In fact, one of our nemesis, the CSPI, Consumers for Science in the Public Interest, which I could think of another name for that acronym, but they actually testified before the Senate to say that we were snake oil salesmen, and they tried to get the FTC to shut us down, and nothing happened because we're not breaking any rules, you know. But this is the same organization. The reason I mention them is that they had this campaign. They took out huge full-page ads in the USA Today. I don't know, was it the 80s? I think it might have been the 80s, where they vilified saturated fat. So at that time, McDonald's, which was, you know, one of the biggest chains, and still is, of course, was using tallow, which is a very, very healthy fat. It's beef tallow. It's tallow from cows, or fat from cows. And they would cook their French fries or fry them in tallow, and that is healthy. I mean, you're heating to a high temperature, so it's not. See, people think beef tallow is saturated fat, and it is mostly saturated, but no fat is exclusively saturated or polyunsaturated. It's a mixture of all of them. So it has small amounts of polyunsaturated fat. So when you bring it to high temperature, it's going to cause problems. So it's not completely safe, but it's a lot safer for what they recommended people substitute it with, and they did. McDonald's listened to them. They put this public pressure on them to stop using beef tallow, and they use vegetable oil. You know, the French fries being distributed at McDonald's and sold there are literally, I mean, they're definitely tasty. I mean, who doesn't like the way, you know, freshly fried French fry with salt, and, you know, it just tastes really good. It's one of the worst things for your body. I mean,
Yeah.
maybe donuts are worse, but not, you know, they're pretty comparable. And it's not the salt and it's not the carbs. It's not. I'm not a big fan of excess carbs. It's the oil by itself. Even if it was pure oil and it wasn't heated, it would be a problem. When you heat it, you cause other issues. So people think it's the trans fat or the cyclic aldehydes. It's not. It's the intrinsic constituent of the linoleic fatty acid that's in there that just in its pristine condition in excess amounts will just screw with you metabolically and destroy your health. And you can prove it in animal studies. It's just so clear when you look at it. Unfortunately, this concept is not widely appreciated at the level that it's need to have people understand to change their health and limit this dangerous poison from their diet. So that's one of my new passions. And I'm guilty of it too, because I didn't really understand this principle until this year. I mean, we've been teaching people to avoid vegetable oils for a long time, but it's far more than that. I mean, you really need to analyze all the foods you're eating to limit this fatty acid from your diet, because high levels of it are just a recipe for destruction for your metabolic health.
Yeah. Yeah, I learned that the more kind of clean looking the vegetable oil, the more likely it's kind of toxic to you, that it's been bleached, Drano-ed, and all these chemical processes that made them even more toxic, just so they look nice and clean to sell more on the shelves.
But here's the extension of that, and that's there's very few people who disagree with that. But the extension of that, if you eliminated all the processing and you took the seeds from which these oils were extracted, and you just ate the raw, unprocessed seeds. Now, eating soybeans by themselves is obviously not a wise idea, but canola or corn, corn by itself. So it was unprocessed. It's still going to be highly problematic. So yes, the processing makes it worse, and it leads to other issues. But just the very pristine fat, all by itself in excess, is a recipe for metabolic disaster. It really is. So that's the increased level of awareness of the danger of this issue, because people think, well, I don't eat vegetables, it's fine, so I have the corn, I have all these. See, the grains are problematic. People think it's a problem because of the carbs, and carbs, yes, can be an issue, but almost all grains are high in linoleic acid, which is far more dangerous than the carbs. can be potentially problematic, but are necessary, I believe, for staying healthy. Now, if someone's morbidly obese, it probably is a good idea to avoid carbs for a while until they get metabolically flexible. But once you're optimized, you need carbohydrates. If you want to be healthy, you need carbs. There's many people who are advocates of being keto all the time, and they continue that along that path, and they will get at some point their health will suffer because you were designed to have carbohydrates. So I mean, you're designed to go for long periods without any. That's sort of a resource, a skill set our body has provided us to do and evolve with, because we always haven't had access to food like we have now, where you can get it at the grocery store. I mean, people throughout history, most of the time, they had to go with pretty significant periods of time without any food. So it's a metabolic adaptation that we have this resource, which is why we survived as a species.
Yeah. So if you're going to replace these toxic oils or these very unhealthy industrially processed oils with healthier ones, avocado oil, coconut oil, what would be the recommendations?
Well, coconut would be a better oil if you're going to use oil. I just don't think you need to do that necessarily. Interestingly, two ostensibly healthy oils, olive oil and avocado oil, are commonly adulterated. Commonly, 80% of them. That's more than common, right? So you've got to be very, very diligent and buy if you're going to use those oils, from very reputable sources, usually for small companies that you can trust and certify, because otherwise, it's not going to be good. So the other thing you can do with those oils, if you're going to use them, linoleic acid is a polyunsaturated fat, and those fats tend to remain liquid even at lower temperatures. So you can put your olive oil in the fridge. And have you ever done that? What happens?
No, I haven't. But okay. It would get solid then, right?
Ideally. But even and we sell olive oil on our site. We sell a biodynamic olive oil, one of the best in the world. But even that one, about 10 to 20% of the fats in there are linoleic acid. So you can't go crazy with olive oil, but you could if you did a revision of this. And one of the revisions is to put your olive oil in the fridge, maybe overnight for a number of hours, and let it get cold. And when it gets cold, the healthy fats will turn solid, and the linoleic acid will rise to the top and be liquid, so that you take your olive oil out of the fridge and you either pour that liquid down the drain or pour it into a container, better yet, and then collect it until you have enough, and then give it to someone you don't like a relative or a neighbor you're not too fond of. Give them that. And say, here's some great olive oil extract, But that's the one that's going to cause the problem. And then it's healthy. So that's a little trick that you can do with avocado oil too, I believe. And then, because avocados themselves, I have an avocado a day, but that's one of my high sources of linoleic acid. I eat eggs too. I have my own chickens. I have like 8 chickens, and I have about half a dozen eggs a day. But that is my highest source. That's half my source of linoleic acid, because chickens eat grains, and they don't have the capacity. Unlike cattle, cows, or lambs who have more than one stomach, they can take that grain, and because they have multiple stomachs, the bacteria in the other stomachs can digest it and convert it to other fats. So they're not high in linoleic acid. I mean, literally, the amount of linoleic acid in chicken is like 10 times greater than that in a cow or a buffalo or a lamb. It's just quite dramatic.
Wow. And I remember when we were working on the Stop COVID Cold site together, and you were working on the test, the quiz. That's when you had first raised this point to me, that the processed oils is a key contributor. It's not just the vitamin D. And so if you want to be COVID resilient, you not only want to have a high score in terms of your vitamin D levels, but you want to have minimal or no intake of fast foods and these processed oils.
Yeah. And I'm sure people have heard of the cytokine storm that typically kills people. And cytokines are simply small protein molecules that are signals to different areas in your body for other tissues. But interestingly, the likelihood of increasing the cytokine storm is exponentially increased when you have high amounts of linoleic acid. So, and I don't want to go deep into the molecular biology because it's not appropriate for this audience, but it really it's a major contributor to this. So if you limit that, the likelihood you're going to be producing these storms and needing things, there's many interventions and that you can use that will get you through this. So there's very little reason to be fearful of this illness because there's so many simple strategies that can be careful. My favorite is something called nebulized peroxide. So you use a nebulizer, and you simply use very low concentrations of hydrogen peroxide, about 30-fold decrease from the typical concentration you buy at the grocery store or the pharmacy, and just breathe it in. And the devil's in the details, and I've got videos on my site that tells you how to do that. But it's been so impressive. I've seen people use it who were very sick, almost felt like they're ready to die, had a fever, coughing like crazy, just had no energy, and felt miserable. And literally within hours, they were pretty much normal. And that's a consistent response to this. And the other problem, though, is it's so expensive because that peroxide, it's about maybe a quarter to half a penny. Yeah. So, but you do have to find the nebulizer, and not all of them work really well, but it's a one-time investment. You can use it for yourself, your family, the whole neighborhood if you want to, because you can just easily sterilize the mass that you're breathing through. So, with some alcohol or peroxide itself. So
that's really good to know. So I'll include the video from your site.
Yeah, that would be good
in the show notes for this. Yeah.
Oh, and because it's it literally could save your life. And here's the key point, though. If this intrigues you and I provided compelling argument to you, because I actually have two videos. I think one that explains the science and the other tells you how to do it. The key to know is that, yes, it's important to understand that this resource is available, but it's like being prepared for any emergency. You want to have it ready when you're ready to go. Because if you or someone you love dearly comes down with this, it's Friday, you don't have this, what are you going to do? You're going to wait. You're not going to be able to go to the local store and get it. So you have to have it ready to go. This is not something you need to use all the time, but you need to have it locked and loaded, So if you get, because I've seen so many people, and it's such a pleasure. Like one of our chief editors that reviews our content on the site, for grammatical errors, she came down with this, and she believed me. She had it, was in her stomach. She started it, and boom, literally within hours was better. It's just crazy. But she didn't, and it was on a weekend, which is typically always happens, right? She would order it, didn't get it till like 3 days later. It'd have been if she can get it at all. So just be prepared is the key thing. I was a Boy Scout, so that's a motto I deeply appreciate.
Yeah. And what was a good score for vitamin D levels? I checked mine in the summer, and it was 100. So that's
100's a little bit too high.
Yeah.
So there's no way it gets there. Very, very hard to get your vitamin D to 100 naturally without a supplement. So you probably were taking supplements. I would definitely lower the dose.
Yeah.
It only needs to be 60 to 80. There's no benefit for going over that. And there may be some potential harm, although it's pretty darn safe. You could probably go to 200 and not be damaged, but there's no, you don't want to give your body more than it needs. Typically the threshold you want is about 40. And the reason you want a little higher than 40 is because it's fat soluble, and if you don't get sun exposure, as no one does in the winter, it tends to go down. Now, my level is about 60 or so, and I don't take any supplements. I haven't taken any for over a decade. And even in a 2-3 month period where I have sun exposure, but it's not sufficient to cause increase in vitamin D, it'll go down, but it doesn't go below 40. So that's the threshold you don't want to fall below. So 60 is like the buffer that keeps you above 40, because 40 is where you want to always be greater than. And not all conventional scientists or researchers will agree with that. They'll say it's 30. And this is nanograms per milliliter. If you're watching this from Canada or Europe, they use nanomoles, or units they use are nanomoles per liter, which is 2.5 times higher. So instead of 60 to 80, that would be 100 to 150 nanomoles. So, but yours obviously was US, so that was nanograms.
Right. Yep. Okay. So let's move off of this topic. Of course, listener, you need to go check out stopcovidcold.com and take the quiz and read the literature about vitamin D and how important it is, and take some action so that you're
Yeah, and those PDFs, there's 2 PDFs on the site. They're free, and you don't have to give your email or anything. One is for the layperson who just wants the details, and the other is for people like healthcare professionals. But even the detailed one is really formatted in a way that makes it very easy to read. There's lots of graphics, and formatting is just optimized for easy digestibility, as opposed to the paper I wrote for the Science Journal Nutrients, which, if you're a scientist or researcher, fine, but you don't want to read that one. You definitely want to read the PDFs. It's much easier to digest than a technical research paper.
Yeah. I had to read plenty of technical research papers in my previous life when I was studying for a PhD in biochemistry. Yep.
Yeah. Oh boy, I love biochemistry. It's just, to me, it's like it's the resource kit you need to debug health and figure it out and optimize pathways. Of course, obviously you have to listen to your body's feedback, but it gives you some really good clues. I mean, I'm just such a huge fan of molecular biology.
Yeah, me too. All right, well, let's move to a topic that I know is near and dear to your heart, and that's biohacking. So I'd love to hear some of your favorite biohacks, some of the things that you personally do, and recommend to our listeners.
Well, one of the things that I already did mention was the vitamin D optimization. I mean, that's like the most foundational basic. And it's interesting that, because if you're optimizing your health, you're increasing your resiliency to all disease. And that wouldn't be COVID-19, but that'd be heart disease and cancer and senile dementia, everything. So that's the benefit of this. Not only do you increase resiliency, but you improve your ability to function at a high level while you're there. So you don't have to, many characteristics that people acquire as they age are typically attributed to aging. And there may be an element of truth in that, but many of those, if not most, don't even have to occur that way at all. It's only a result of aging because people engage in activities that when they do this over time, it causes that type of damage. So you can really slow down and many times prevent some of these things, like, the loss of muscle mass, which is also called sarcopenia. It's a Latin term for muscle. Penia means poverty, and sarco means muscle, so poverty of muscle. It's like 20% of people over 60 have it, and like 80% of people over 60% of people over 85. I forget the specific number, but it's really high. The vast majority of people over 80 have it. So just because it's common as people age doesn't mean it's normal. It's typically common because people are not engaging in activities that is going to limit and stop that. So both of my parents passed away from sarcopenia primarily. That wasn't on a death certificate, but in my view, that was the primary reason. They had sarcopenia, which resulted in frailty. And frailty is not good. I'm sure your listeners and viewers have seen or known someone with frailty, and to be confined to a wheelchair and not be able to actually even stand up without holding on, or even stand up without assistance is really sad and a good predictor that you're not going to be on the planet much longer. So, you need to be able to engage in all life's activities in full range of motion and movement, and that is the key. And once you stop doing that, it's a rapid downhill decline. So it's really important to maintain your muscle mass. And I like something called blood flow restriction training, which I engage in on a regular basis. It came out of Japan from a Dr. Sato, S-A-T-O, and it was developed a system called Katsu, K-A, which is short for, it's a Japanese word. It means additional pressure. So you basically has these bands that you put on your arms and extremities, your legs and your arms, but not at the same time. and you engage in exercises that literally cause where you're using 20 to 30% of your maximum body weight, and you're doing that large amounts of time. It's not just 10 reps, but maybe 100 reps, like 40 one set and then 30 and 30. And, it only takes a few minutes, but you get the benefits of lifting very heavy weights without the risk or damage. Because, when you're 60, 70, 80 years old, it's a bit of a challenge to use high resistance or large, heavy weights because of the risk for damaging yourself. So it allows you to use very light weights and gets massive benefits from it. So I really enjoy it from that perspective. You can still lift heavy weights, but interestingly, the blood flow restriction training seems to provide greater muscle stimulus to muscle growth than the heavy resistance training by itself, through a variety of hormonal factors that gets catalyzed through this process.
Right, and so also related to increasing your muscle density and muscle mass and avoiding this frailty. Part of it, or there's a related thing too, that as people age, especially women, they lose bone density and suffer from osteoporosis, and if they have a fall and break a hip, then that's also a very quick decline and kind of death sentence.
Yeah, there, of course, vitamin D can be useful because it gets calcium into the body. But a lot of people are confused when we're taking calcium supplements, but actually magnesium is probably more important. And another biohack that I learned recently that's really useful and it's very inexpensive to help against osteoporosis and osteopenia would be simply to alkalize your body fluids. And the simple way to do that is just simple baking soda, which is almost free. And you could take about a quarter teaspoon 3 times a day, and that will do it. And you're taking enough by measuring the pH of your urine. Well, how do you do that? You get something as simple as litmus paper. You pick it up on Amazon, and it basically has numbers from like 1 to 14. And you want to go for 7. 7 is like a neutral pH. Most people have acidic urine, so it'll be a 4, 5, or 6. If the lower the number, the more acidic it is. But a pH of 7 is really pretty good. You can even go to 7.5 or 8. And you just measure urine. When your urine's to that level, then you're taking enough baking soda. Problem is it tastes kind of bad. You can hide it in smoothies. If you're having a smoothie, then it's easy to do it that way. Or you can put it up as a capsule. I actually like potassium bicarb instead of sodium bicarb better. So I take about 3/4 teaspoons a day. And that's been enough. So why do I talk about that in osteoporosis? Well, when you're acidic and you have an acidic urine, your body doesn't like that. So it needs to neutralize the urine. And the way it buffers that urine and neutralizes is by taking the minerals out of your bone. So if you have a neutral urine, then you can preserve the minerals in your bone and keep a healthy bone density. So it's a simple hack, and it's not one that's commonly appreciated. It's just to alkalize your body. Now, if you eat a lot of plant foods, you typically they will buffer alkalize your body too, so that it becomes less an issue. That's why you measure your urine. So this is not a generic recommendation. You have to customize it for your own body because some people are going to need a lot more. Like when I was I just fasted last week for 4 days, and fasting you generate ketones, and ketones are acidic. So I had to double the dose of my bicarb, just to keep my urine neutral.
Interesting. So how often are you doing the multiple days of fasting?
I wouldn't recommend to anyone unless they were in the beginning state of acquiring health and they were morbidly obese and needed to lose weight. They may do it a lot more frequently, but if you're already healthy, I think once a quarter is more than sufficient. And probably the most fascinating aspect of longevity medicine is something called Centalytic Therapy. Have you heard of that before?
I have not.
Okay, so you know what a senescent cell is?
I do.
Okay, well, for those who don't, let me explain. That describes a cell that is kind of like an aged geriatric cell. And when your cells get in this state, they stop reproducing. Now, you say, so what's wrong with that? It's just hanging around. Well, that's not the issue. The issue is when it gets into the state, it starts producing these inflammatory, like cytokines that diffuse out of the cell and contaminate all the cells around them. And essentially, it's like having a rotten apple in a bucket in a barrel of a bucket of apples. Bucket, yeah, a bucket of apples. So it contaminates it. It secretes these chemicals that essentially cause it to go south. So it's, in my view, probably one of the most exciting aspects of anti-aging medicine is the optimization, integration of senolytic therapy. And these senolytic treatments can be simple things like quercetin or fisetin that can be done and essentially cause your body to remove them, selectively identify and then eliminate these cells from your body. So that's the only reason I did the fasting, was to implement some senolytic therapy, because I was trying to target a specific health challenge I was having. And I did high dose senolytics during it, because they tend to work better when you're in a fasting state, because senolytic therapy is a sort of a derivative, a refinement of a process called autophagy. Mm-hmm. And autophagy is self-eating, so it's a removal of damaged cells. It should be occurring normally. So one of the other primary strategies I would recommend, to obtain metabolic flexibility, is something called time-restricted eating. Many people refer to it as intermittent fasting, but that is a more generic term. But time-restricted eating is where you eat within a window of about 6 to 8 hours. For most people, especially if you're older. I used to go lower than that, like to eat within 2 hours even, like one meal a day, or 4 hours. But I think as you get older, your body, if we're over 60, 70, you're going to want to not go much lower than that on a long-term basis. Short-term, you can obviously do fasting for days, but just to give your body the resources. So when you do that, it just activates all these magical metabolic benefits. So that's something I do pretty much every day. It's rarely, I typically have an 18-hour window where I'm not eating. So I'm eating within 6 hours. And ideally you want to have that window at least 3 to 4 hours before the last meal, 3 to 4 hours before you go to bed. So, and then you can optimize, because you are not designed to be digesting your food when you're sleeping. If you're eating before you go to bed, you are just hurting yourself and maybe not even being aware of it, but it's not a good strategy. And it's just so simple to do. Maybe less easy for people with families, who go to work, although many of us are not physically going to the job site anymore. We're staying home and working, so we have a lot more flexibility. So if you're feel fortunate in that circumstance that you have some control over when you're going to eat with your family, just dial that time back. Rather than 7 o'clock, go to 5, or, in my case, I stopped eating at 3 o'clock. Sometimes today it'll be 2 o'clock is the last meal I have, and then I'll eat at like 8 o'clock the next morning. So, and that gives me an 18-hour window where my body has not seen any food, and that's just a beautiful. It'll make it so easy to achieve an ideal body weight. Because getting healthy is not that hard if you understand these basic biological principles, and one of them is this restricted eating window, and the other is avoiding linoleic acid, and then just to avoiding processed foods in general, which is like not a Nobel Prize concept, but it's just a simple strategy. So you do those, avoid linoleic acid, don't go crazy with carbohydrates, and just eat healthy carbs like fruits. Keep that window short, and your body will develop metabolic efficiency over time and become very resilient to almost every disease. And it happens slowly. If you've been sick and you haven't been eating this way for many decades, then it's going to take a while to have your body recover, but it will go towards health by itself. It's designed to be healthy. It's not designed to be sick. It's designed to be healthy. That's what your body is.
Yeah.
If you give it what it needs, you don't have to direct it. It'll do it by itself. And fasting is a way to kind of speed up the process. It's not a simple strategy, though, and requires some willpower and discipline, but especially the first 2 days, because it becomes more of a challenge the second day. You start to become hungry, but after the second day, your ketone levels rise, which is a water-soluble fat that your liver makes when you're in a fasted state to give your body energy instead of carbohydrates. Then that suppresses your appetite quite dramatically. So you're not really hungry And you might psychologically miss the food, but you're not really don't have hunger pains or anything, and you could easily do it. And you forget about food for a while. And they said, "Oh yeah, I haven't eaten for 3 or 4 days." It's like, yeah.
So
So
is this a good measure also to deal with, let's say, fatty liver? Because that's pretty common.
well, we used to think that fatty liver was due to carbohydrate excess, and now I'm absolutely convinced. There's not a micro doubt in my mind that NAFLD, NAFLD, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, is an excess of linoleic acid. That's exactly what it is. You eliminate that fat from your diet, and it will just the NAFLD will disappear overnight. Maybe not eliminate, because you do
You need a small
conventionally.
amount, right?
Well, that's what I was just going to say, is that it's thought of as an essential fat, but there's newer research to suggest it may not be. But here's the key. This is, so how much? How much do you need? Well, you don't want to ever go more than 2% of your diet. So there's an application called Cronometer, Cronometer, cronometer.com. It's free. You can very carefully enter your diet, all the foods, and measure it so you know how much you have with a scale. And then it will tell you how much omega-6 you have in your diet. And so say in my case, it's 8 grams. So in every gram of fat, there's 9 calories. So that's 72 calories of omega-6 fat. So you take that 72 and you divide it by the total calories you're eating. In my case, it might be 3,500 calories, 3,800 calories. So you do that calculation, you get a percent. So ideally, the percent should be under 2%. So most people, it's about 20%. So that is the goal, and because that's more than enough. And then you want to have some omega-3s in there, but there's a lot of confusion on this, the omega-3 to 6 ratio. And the biggest one is dangerous, is that, oh, I've got a lot of omega-6, just may take a lot more omega-3. That is not going to work. That will even get you worse. You need some omega-3, but the solution to a distorted omega-6 to 3 ratio is to lower your omega-6, not increase your omega-3.
Got it. Okay. Well, this has been phenomenal and eye-opening, and a lot of stuff. I've been biohacking for a little while now, and I learned a lot of stuff, and I'm sure our listeners, you're going to save some lives with this information. So thank you
That's
so
the
much.
intention. Yeah. I actually, I haven't traveled. Last time I traveled was in March, and I went to Mexico. But every one of them, I had to cancel 3 biohacking trips. Dave Asprey's one in this year, and it was rescheduled. And then the one in London I had to cancel. So, but I'm actually speaking at a biohacking event to select people that paid $50,000 to attend this event to see me and Dave speak.
Wow.
And some other scientists. So, yeah, and it's not a big group, but so I get to speak for 6 hours and give them all these details. So you got some of the highlights of that event that people paid $50,000 to attend. I'm not kidding you. This is not like blowing smoke up your butt. This is because there's a real ardent biohacker who started the event who just wanted to get the top experts in the world and just brainstorm every quarter about the things they could do to optimize themselves. So I still haven't finished my 6-hour slot PowerPoint for this yet, but those are some of the highlights I shared with you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you for all that you do to help make humanity better. And yeah, keep it up. You're doing fantastic service to humanity.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah.
It's easy and fun when you love what you're doing.
So where do we send our listener to learn more and buy the supplements and all that sort of good stuff?
Well, especially the hydrogen peroxide video. I think you're gonna have a link here, but if you can't find it, you just go to my site, Mercola.com. Real easy. As I said, I started that in '97 before Google did, so it's easy to get my last name as my domain, because there weren't many websites back in 1997. There were some, surely. But so you go to Mercola.com. We have a daily newsletter or weekly newsletter, whichever you prefer. And so we have a lot of research there, and we have tens of thousands of articles. You just go into our search engine at the top, and you can look back to see what we've written in the past. If you want to look for search for a topic that you need some information on. And then stopcovidcold.com. Again, stopcovidcold, all one word.com. Great site. It's helped a lot of people, and take it from there.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Mercola. And thank you, listener. Now get out there and make a difference in the world and help some people to return to health.